Before I get into today's topic, I want to say something important first. I am not a mental health professional. I am not a therapist or a doctor. Everything I share here comes from personal reflection, research, and the ongoing process of trying to understand my own mind and experiences. If anything I say today feels like it applies to you in a serious way, please consider reaching out to someone qualified to help. This channel is a learning diary, not a clinical resource. I share what I observe and what I learn, and I hope it helps someone feel a little less alone. That is really the whole point. With that said, today I want to talk about something that is genuinely hard to explain, even to yourself when you are experiencing it. I am talking about depersonalization and derealization. And I want to connect it to the INFJ experience, because I think there is a specific reason why people wired this way might be more familiar with these feelings than they realize. Let me start with what these two things actually mean, because the words themselves can sound intimidating. Depersonalization is the experience of feeling detached from yourself. It is like watching your own life from the outside. You are going through the motions, you are doing things, you are having conversations, but there is a strange sense that the person doing all of that is not quite you, or at least not the real you. It can feel like you are an observer of your own life rather than the one actually living it. Some people describe it as feeling like a robot going through programmed actions. Others say it is like watching themselves in a movie, where they can see what is happening but do not feel fully inside the experience. Derealization is slightly different. It is when the world around you starts to feel unreal. Not in a dramatic, hallucinatory way, but in a quiet, unsettling way where familiar places feel strange, ordinary experiences feel distant or dreamlike, and the reality you are standing in feels somehow not solid. Like you are watching a very convincing simulation rather than actually being present in real life. Both of these experiences exist on a spectrum. At the milder end, they feel like occasional moments of disconnection that pass relatively quickly. At the more intense end, they can be persistent and deeply disorienting. And importantly, they are not signs that someone is going crazy. They are actually a recognized psychological response to stress, anxiety, and trauma. The brain essentially uses disconnection as a way to protect itself from experiences that feel too overwhelming to process head-on. It is a survival mechanism, not a flaw. Now, why does this connect specifically to people who identify as INFJ? One of the most defining traits of this personality type is an extremely rich inner world. INFJs live a great deal of their lives inside their own minds. They think deeply, they feel intensely, and they process everything through a complex internal filter before it ever reaches the surface. That inner world is genuinely a sanctuary for them, a place where they can make sense of things, where they can think without interruption, where they feel most like themselves. But when the outer world becomes too chaotic, too painful, or too consistently unsafe, that inner world can shift from being a sanctuary into being an escape hatch. Instead of using it to process reality, the mind starts using it to get away from reality. And that is where depersonalization and derealization can begin to creep in. There is also the question of emotional absorption. People wired this way naturally pick up on the emotions and energy of those around them. In a healthy environment, that sensitivity is a gift. It allows for deep empathy, genuine connection, and an ability to understand people at a level most others cannot. But in a chaotic or emotionally unsafe environment, absorbing that much incoming energy becomes genuinely overwhelming. And when the mind reaches the edge of what it can hold, it sometimes responds by pulling back entirely, by creating a layer of distance between the person and what they are experiencing. That distance is depersonalization. I notice this in myself sometimes, particularly during conversations that require me to be fully present and engaged while also managing a lot of internal noise. There are moments where I am in the middle of talking, I am maintaining the conversation, I am saying the right things, but some part of me is watching the whole thing from a step or two back. Like there is the version of me that is performing the interaction, and then the part of me that is just observing it happen. It is a strange split, and it used to confuse me more than it does now because I did not have language for it. Having language for something matters. When you can name what you are experiencing, it stops feeling like proof that something is fundamentally wrong with you and starts feeling like something that can be understood and worked with. Now, let me talk about maladaptive daydreaming because I think it connects directly to this conversation and is worth addressing on its own. Most people daydream. It is normal. You let your mind wander. You imagine different scenarios. You think about things that are not happening right now. That is healthy. It is a form of mental rest and creative processing. Maladaptive daydreaming is when that tendency goes further than rest or creativity. It becomes a way of spending significant amounts of time in an imagined inner world as a way of escaping from a reality that feels painful or unsafe. The person creates detailed inner scenarios, sometimes involving alternate versions of themselves living completely different lives. And over time, the inner world starts to feel more comfortable and more real than the outer one. This is not a sign of weakness or laziness. It is actually a sign that someone has been coping with something difficult for a long time, and this was the tool their mind developed to survive it. Research suggests that maladaptive daydreaming is more common in people who have experienced chronic stress or difficult early life circumstances. When a child grows up in an environment that is consistently unpredictable or emotionally unsafe, their mind learns to create a safer inner world as a retreat. It is adaptive in the beginning. The problem comes later, when the external circumstances have changed but the habit of retreating into the inner world has not changed with them. The escape that was once necessary becomes a pattern that makes it harder to stay present in a life that might actually now be safer than the one being escaped from. For someone who is also naturally introspective and imaginatively rich, the way many INFJs are, this pattern can become deeply ingrained. Because the inner world is already so detailed and so vivid, the pull toward it is stronger than it might be for someone with a less active internal life. The daydream is genuinely compelling, and the real world, by comparison, can feel flat, disappointing, or just exhausting in ways that the inner world is not. But here is the thing about living primarily in your head. It is also isolating in a specific way. Because even when you are physically present with someone, if your mind is somewhere else entirely, the connection does not fully form. You are there, but you are not really there. And that gap between presence and absence is something other people eventually feel, even if they cannot name it. And then the loneliness deepens, not because you are alone, but because you cannot quite land in the moment long enough to let anyone in. There is also a pattern that I think is worth naming, which is the way dramatic or emotionally intense content, like Korean dramas or emotional films or deeply moving books, can act as both a comfort and a trigger for these experiences. On one level, this kind of content is a way of accessing emotions in a safer container. You can feel things deeply through a story without those feelings being directly attached to your own life. For someone who has learned to disconnect from their own pain, experiencing emotion through fiction can actually be one of the few ways they allow themselves to feel at all. But on the other level, dramatic content can also unlock memories that have been quietly stored away, memories that surface with the full emotional weight of when they were originally formed rather than the softer, more processed feeling of something you have genuinely moved through. And that can be genuinely disorienting. The experience of remembering something traumatic and having it feel like it is happening now rather than like something in the past that is over, that is a recognized aspect of how trauma affects memory. Normal memories tend to feel like looking at a photograph. You remember it, you know it happened, but it has a kind of distance. Traumatic memories that have not been properly processed can feel more like being back inside the moment. And that is part of what makes healing from difficult experiences so complicated. The mind is trying to protect you from the memory by locking it away, but the lock is not always reliable. And when it gives way, the feeling can be overwhelming. So, what actually helps when you are in the middle of these experiences? The most consistently useful approach involves using the physical senses to come back to the present. Not in a dramatic or forceful way, but gently. Feeling something cold or warm on your skin. Noticing the ground under your feet. Touching something with an interesting texture. Listening to a specific sound in your environment. The point is to give the brain concrete sensory input that anchors it to the current moment, because the body cannot be in the present and in a dissociated state at exactly the same time. Bringing attention to physical sensation is one of the most direct routes back to here and now. Physical movement also helps. Not necessarily intense exercise, though that works for some people. But even walking slowly, doing something with your hands, taking care of plants, interacting with animals, doing something in the physical world that requires your actual attention. These kinds of activities pull the mind back into the body in a way that is gentle but real. Talking or writing, even to yourself, can also help. When you put words to what you are experiencing, even just to describe what you are noticing in the current moment, it activates the part of the brain that is oriented toward language and logic, which tends to be more grounded and present-focused than the parts that drift into disconnection. And this channel, for me, has actually served that purpose in a quiet way. When I research a topic, when I find words for something I have been experiencing, when I share it and then check to see if anyone has watched or responded, all of that brings me back into the present. It reminds me that I am here, that what I think and feel and share has some small form of reach, and that the moment I am in is real even when it does not always feel that way. Not every person who identifies as INFJ will experience depersonalization or derealization. These experiences are linked to stress, trauma, and anxiety, and they can happen to anyone regardless of personality type. But for someone who is already highly sensitive, highly introspective, and who has learned over years to retreat inward when the outside world feels unsafe, the conditions for these experiences can develop more easily. And recognizing that is not a reason to feel hopeless. It is a reason to be gentler with yourself, and to understand that the ways your mind learned to cope were not failures. They were responses. Smart, adaptive responses to things that were genuinely hard. Before I wrap up, I want to ask you something. Have you ever experienced that strange feeling of watching yourself from the outside, or of the world around you feeling a little unreal? And if so, what has helped you come back to the present? I would genuinely love to know, because I think this is one of those topics where hearing from other real people matters more than any research I could share. Drop it in the comments. Thanks for watching. If this video resonated with you, please consider hitting the subscribe button. I am currently working toward my goal of 1,000 subscribers, so I can finally monetize this channel and turn this passion into a sustainable part of my future. This is my unfiltered diary of solo living in the Philippines, and your support helps me keep this channel growing. If you would like to help out even more, you can check out the Buy a Treat for My Pets link in the description. My dogs definitely appreciate the love. Make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss the next update. Thank you for being such an important part of this journey. I will see you in the next one.